Welcome to Leader IAS and Yashas Institute, Navi Mumbai, Maharashtra. Myself, Professor Suhas Sargar. Dear listeners, these are the self-explanatory audio-video book for the self-study of a student. Today, we are all going to learn NCERT Standard 11th, subject Political Science, medium English, Constitution at Work. The chapter number 1, Constitution, Why and How. These are the self-explanatory video book for the self-study of a student, those who are very busy in their personal life or in the working life. Also, they are preparing for the 11th standard exam as well as the competitive exams. So these books are very useful for them. Just have to use a laptop or the mobile earphones or the speaker, and while doing their other tasks as well as while traveling or doing any other works, they can easily grasp this book. So let's begin. The chapter 1, Constitution, Why and Why. How? Constitution, Why and How. First, introduction. This book is about the working of the Indian Constitution. In the chapters that follow, you will read the information about the various aspects of the working of our Constitution. You will learn about the various institutions of the government in our country and their relationship with each other. But before you begin to read about the elections, the government and the president and prime ministers, it is necessary to understand that the entire structure of the government and the various principles that bind the institution of government and have their origin in the life in the Constitution of India. After studying these chapters, you will learn what a constitution means, what a constitution does to the society, how the constitution governed allocation of power in society, and what was the way in which the Constitution of India was made. Why do we need a constitution? What is a constitution? What are its functions? What roles does it perform for a society? How does a constitution relate to our daily existence? Answering these questions is not as difficult as you might think. Constitution allows the coordination and assurance. Imagine yourself to be a member of a reasonably large group. Further imagine that this group has the following characteristics. The members of this group are the diverse in various ways. They have different religious allegiance. Some are the Hindus, some are Muslim, some are Christians, and some perhaps profess no religion at all. They are also varied in many different respects. They pursue the different professions, have the different abilities, have different hobbies, different tastes in everything from films to books. Some are the rich and some are poor. Some are old, some young. Imagine further that the members of this group are likely to have dispute over various aspects of life. How much property should one be allowed to own? Should it be a compulsory that every child be sent to school or children, or should the parents be allowed to decide how much should this group spend on its safety and security? Or should it be build more parks instead? Should the group be allowed to discriminate against some of its members? Every question will elicit a variety of answers from different people. But for all their diversity, this group has to live together. They are dependent upon each other in a various ways. They require the cooperation of each other. What will enable the group to lie together peacefully? One may say that perhaps the members of these groups can live together if they can agree on some basic rules. Why will the group need certain basic rules? Any group need One may say that perhaps the member of this group can live together if they can agree on basic rules. Why will the group need a certain basic rules? Think of what would happen in the absence of some basic rule. Every individual would be insecure simply because they would not know what members of this group could do to each other. Who could claim right over what? Any group will need some basic rules that are publicly promulgated and knows to all members of that group to achieve a minimal degree of coordination. But these rules must not only be known, they must also be enforceable. If the citizens have no assurance that others will follow these rules, they will themselves have no reason to follow these rules. Saying that the rules are legally enforceable gives an assurance to everybody that the others will follow this. Or if they do not do so, they will be punished. The first function of a constitution is to provide a set of basic rules that allow for minimal coordination amongst members of a society. Activity. Enact the thought experiment of this section in the classroom. The entire class should discuss and arrive at a sum-based decision. They would apply to everyone for the entire session. The decision could be about how would be the class representative be chosen, which decisions will the representative be able to take on behalf of the entire class. Are there some decisions that the class representative cannot take without consulting the entire class? You can add any other items to this list. Collection of the common kitty for the class, organization of the picnic and trips, sharing of the common resources as long as everyone agrees to it. Make sure that you include those subjects that have led to any differences in the past. How to revise this decision in case you need to. Why all these decisions on a paper? Put it upon the notice board. Which problems did you encounter in this decision? Were there differences among the different students? How did you resolve these differences? Did the entire class gain something from the exercise? Specification of decision-making power. The Constitution is a body of fundamental principles according to which a state is constituted or governed. But what should these fundamentals rule be? And what makes them fundamental? Well, the first question is you will have to decide is who get to decide what the laws governing the society should be. You may want the rule 10, but others may want rule Y. You may want rule X, but others may want rule Y. How do we decide those or whose rules or the preferences should govern us? You may think the rules you want everyone to lie by the best, are the best, but others think that their rules are the best. How do we resolve this dispute? So, even before you decide what rules should govern this group, you have to decide who get decide. The Constitution has to provide an answer to this question. It specifies the basic rules, basic allocation of powers in a society. It decides who gets to decide what the laws will be. In principle, this question, who gets to decide, can be answered in many ways. In a monarchical constitution, a monarch decide. In some constitution, like the old Soviet Union, one single party was given the powers to decide. But in a democratic constitution, broadly speaking, the people get to decide. But this matter is not so simple, because even if you answer that the people should decide, it will not answer the question. How should the people decide? For something to be law, should everyone agree to it? Should the people directly vote on each matter as the ancient Greek did? Or should the people express their preferences by electing the representative? But if the people act through their representatives, how should these representatives be elected? How many should there be? In the Indian Constitution, for example, it is specified that in most instances, Parliament gets to decide the laws and the policies, and that Parliament itself be organized in a particular manner. Before identifying what the law in any given society is, you have to identify who has the authority to enact it. If the Parliament has the authority to enact laws, there must be the law that bestow this authority on Parliament in the first place. This is the function of the Constitution. It is an authority that constitutes the governments in the first place. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the power to make decisions in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. Read a cartoon, the European Constitution. The founding fathers. The second function of a constitution is to specify who has the power to make the decision in a society. It decides how the government will be constituted. Limitations on the power of government. But this is clearly not enough. Suppose you decided who had the authority to make decision, but then this authority passed laws that you thought were patently unfair. It prohibited them from practicing your religion, for instance, or it enjoyed that clothes of a certain color were prohibited, or that you were not free to sing certain song, or that people who belong to a particular group, caste or religion would always have to serve others and would not be allowed to retain any property, or that government could arbitrarily arrest someone, or that only people of a certain skin color would be allowed to draw water from wells. You would obviously think these laws were unjust and unfair, and even though they were passed by the government that had come into existence based on certain procedure, there could be something obviously unjust about that government enacting these laws. So the third function of constitution is to set some limits on what a government can impose on its citizens. These limits are fundamental in the sense that the government may never trespass them. Constitution limit the power of government in many ways. The most common way of limiting the power of government is to specify the certain fundamental rights that all of us possess as a citizen, which no government can ever be allowed to violate. The exact content and the interpretation of these rights varies from constitution to constitution, but most constitutions will protect the basic clusters of rights. Citizens will be protected from being arrested arbitrarily and for no reason. This is the one basic limitation upon the power of government. Citizens will normally have the right of some liberties to freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of association, and freedom to conduct a trade or the business, etc. In practice, these rights can be limited during the time of national emergency, and the Constitution specifies the circumstances under which these rights may be withdrawn. So you first create a monster and then start worrying about saving yourself from it. It would be say, why create this monster called the government in the first place? Aspirations of the goals of a society. Most of the other constitutions limited themselves largely to allocating decision-making power and setting some limits to the government power. But many 12th century constitution, of which the Indian constitution, many 20th century constitution, of which the Indian constitution is the finest example, also provide an enabling framework for the government to do certain positive things. To express the aspirations and the goals of society, the Indian constitution was particularly innovative in this respect. Societies with a deep entrenched inequality of various kinds will not only have to set the limits on the power of government, they will also have to enable and empower the government to take the positive measures to overcome the forms of inequality or deprivations. For example, India aspires to be a society that is free of caste discrimination. If this is our society aspirations, the government will have to be enabled or empowered to take all necessary steps to achieve this goal. In a country like South Africa, which had a deep history of racial discrimination, its new constitution had to enable the government to end the racial discrimination. More positively, a constitution may enshrine the aspiration of a society. The framers of the Indian constitution, for example, thought that each individual in a society should have all that is necessary for them to lead a life of the minimal dignity and the social self-respect, minimum material well-being, education, etc. The Indian constitution enables the government to take a positive welfare of the measures, some of which are legally enforceable. As we go on studying the Indian constitution, we shall find that such enabling provisions have the support of the preamble to our constitution, and these provisions are found in the section of fundamental rights. The directive principles of state policies also enjoin the government to fulfill a certain aspiration of the people. The fourth function of a constitution is to enable the government to fulfill the aspiration of a society and create a condition for a just society. Dear listener, these are the self-explanatory, without explanatory audio-video book from Leader IAS and YES Institute. Myself, Professor Suhas Sargar, presenting for you. Next, in a diagram, we are seeing what does it take to write a nice thing in the constitution. What the point in writing down a lofty aspiration and the goals if they cannot change the life of the people. In box, enabling provisions of the constitution. Constitution are not only the rules and regulation controlling the powers of the government, they also give the powers to the government for pursuing collective good of the society. Constitution of the South Africa assign many responsibilities to the government. It wants the government to take the measures to promote conservation of nature, make efforts to protect the person or groups subject to unfair discrimination, and provides that the government must progressively ensure adequate housing to all, healthy care, healthcare, etc. In case of Indonesia also, the government is enjoined to establish and conduct national education system. The Indonesia constitution ensures that the poor and destitute children will be looked after by the government. Fundamental identity of a people. Finally, and perhaps even most importantly, the constitution expresses the fundamental identity of a people. This means The people as a collective entity come into being only through the basic constitution. It is by agreeing to a basic set of norms about how one should be governed and who should be governed that one form of a collective identity. One has many set of identities that exist prior to a constitution, but by agreeing to a certain basic norms and principle, one constitutes the one's basic political identity. Second, constitutional norms are the overarching framework within which the one pursue individual aspirations, the goals and freedom. The Constitution sets authoritative constraints upon what one may or may not do. It defines the fundamental values that we may not trespass. So, the Constitution also gives one a moral identity. Third and finally, it may not be the case that many basic political and the moral values are now shared across different constitutional traditions. If one looks at the constitution around the world, they differ in many respects. In the form of the government, they enjoin in many procedural details, but they also share a good deal. Most modern constitutions create a form of the government that is democratic in some respect. Most claim to protect the certain basic rules, but constitutions are different in the way they embody the conception of national identity. Most nations are an amalgamation of a complex set of historical traditions. They weave together the diverse groups that reside within the nation in a different ways. For example, the German identity was constituted by being ethnically German. The constitution gave expression to this identity. The Indian constitution, on the other hand, does not make ethnic identity a criterion for a citizenship. Different nations embody a different conception of what the relationship. In a diagram, you read a cartoon. The writing of a new Iraqi constitution after the collapse of Saddam Hussein regime saw a lot of conflict between different ethnic groups in the country. What do these different people stand for? Compare the conflict depicted here with that depicted in earlier cartoons for the European Union and India. Different nations embodied the different conception of what the relationship between the different regions of a nation and the central government should be. This relationship constitutes the national identity of a country. Check your progress. So in a chart, here are the some provisions of the Indian and other constitution. For each of these, write the function that this provision performs. The authority of a constitution. We have outlined some of the functions as constitution performs. These functions explain why most societies have a constitution. But there are the three further questions can you ask about constitution. First, what is a constitution? How the effective is a constitution? And is a constitution just? In most countries, the constitution is a compact document that comprises a number of articles about the state, specifying how the state is to be constituted and what norms it should follow. When we ask for the constitution of a country, we are usually referring to these documents, but some countries, the United Kingdom, for instance, do not have one single document that can be called a constitution. Rather, they have a series of documents and decisions that, taken collectively, are referred to as the constitution. So, we can say that the constitution is a document or a set of the documents that seeks to perform the function that we mentioned above. But many constitutions around the world exist only on paper. They are mere words existing on a parchment. The crucial question is, how effective is a constitution? What makes it effective? What ensures that it has a real impact on the lives of people? Making the constitution effective depends on many factors. Mode of promulgations. This refers to how a constitution comes into being, who crafted the constitution, and how much authority did they have. In many countries, constitutions remain defunct because they are crafted by military leaders or the leaders who are not popular and do not have the ability to carry the people with them. The most successful constitution like India, South Africa and United States are the constitution which were created in the aftermath of popular national movements. Although India's constitution was formally created by Constitution Assembly between December 1946 and November 1949. It drew upon a long history of the nationalist movement that had a remarkable ability to take along different sections of Indian society together. The constitution drew enormous legitimacy from the fact that it was drawn up by people who enjoyed the immense public credibility, who had the capacity to negotiate and command the respect of a wide sections of society, and who were able to convince the people that the constitution was not only an instrument for the aggrandizement of their personal power. The final document reflected the broad national consensus at the time. Some countries have subjected their constitution to a full-fledged referendum, where all the people votes on the desirability of a constitution. The Indian constitution was never subjected to such a referendum, but nevertheless carried enormous public authority because it had a consensus and the backing of the leaders who were themselves popular. Although the constitution itself was not subjected to a referendum, the people adopted it as their own by abiding to its provisions. Therefore, the authority of the people who enacted the constitution helps determine in part its prospect for success. In box, the debate over the constitution making in Nepal. Making a constitution is not always an easy and smooth affair. Nepal is an example of complicated nature of constitution making. Since 1948, the Nepal has had 5 constitutions in 1948, 1951, 1959, 1962 and 1990. But all these constitutions were granted by the King of Nepal. The 1990 constitution introduced a multi-party competition, though the king continued to hold final power in the many respects. For many years, the Nepal was faced with a militant political agitation for restructuring the government. The main issue was the role of monarchy in the constitution of Nepal. Some groups in Nepal wanted to establish the constitution of a monarchy and establish a republican form of government. Others believe that it may be useful to shift to the limited monarchy with a reduced role for the king. The king himself was not ready to give up the powers. He took over all powers in October 2002. Many political parties and the organization demanded the formation of new constituent assembly. The Communist Party of Nepal, Maoist, was in the forefront of the struggle for a popularly elected constituent assembly. Finally, under pressure of the popular agitation, the king had to install a government acceptable to the agitating parties. This government has stripped the king of almost all powers. In 2008, the Nepal emerged as a democratic republic after abolishing the monarchy. Finally, Nepal adopted a new constitution in 2015. Box closed. Dear listeners, these are the video book for the self-study of a student without any explanation. We are from Leader IAS and Yashas Institute, Navi Mumbai, Maharashtra. Myself, Professor Suhas Sargar, presenting this video. The substantive provision of a constitution. It is the hallmark of a successful constitution that it gives everyone in a society some reason to go along with its provision. A constitution that, for instance, allowed the permanent majorities to oppress minority groups within society would give the minority no reason to go along with the provision of the constitution, or a constitution that systematically privileged some members at the expense of others, or that systematically entrenched the power of a small group in a society would cease to command allegiance. If any group feels their identity is being stifled, they will have no reason to abide by the constitution. No constitution by itself achieves the perfect justice, but it has to convince the people that it provides a framework for pursuing the basic justice. Do this thought experiment. Ask yourself this question: what would be the content of some basic rule in a society such that they gave everyone a reason to go along with them? The more a constitution preserves the freedom and equality of all its members, the more likely it is to be succeed. Thus, the Indian Constitution, broadly speaking, give everyone a reason to go along with its broad outlines. After studying this book, one should be able to answer this question in the affirmative. Balanced institutional design. Constitutions are often subverted not by the people but by the small groups who wish to enhance their own power. Well crafted constitution fragment powers in the society intelligently so that no single group can subvert the constitution. One way of such intelligent designing of a constitution is to ensure that no single institution acquires monopoly of power. This is often done by fragmenting the powers across the different institutions. The Indian Constitution, for example, horizontally fragments the power across different institutions like the legislature, executive, and the judiciary, and even independent statutory bodies like the Election Commission. This ensures that even if one institution wants to subvert the constitution, other can check its transgressions. An intelligent system of check and balance has facilitated the success of the Indian Constitution. Another important aspect of intelligent institutional design is that the Constitution must strike the right balance between certain values, norms, and the procedure as authoritative. At the same time, allow enough flexibility to its operation to adapt to changing needs and the circumstances. Too rigid a constitution is likely to break under the weight of change. A constitution that is, on the other hand, too flexible will give no security, predictability, or the identity to a people. Successful constitutions strike the right balance between the preserving core values and adapting them to new circumstances. You will notice the wisdom of makers of the Indian Constitution in the chapter on the Constitution as a living document. Chapter 9. The Indian Constitution is described as a living document. By striking the balance between the possibility to change the provision and the limits on such change, the Constitution has ensured that it will survive as a document respected by people. This arrangement also ensures that no section or the group can on its own subvert the Constitution. Therefore, in determining whether a constitution has the authority you can ask yourself three questions. First, were the people who enacted the constitution credible? These questions will be answered in the remaining part of this chapter. Secondly, did the constitution ensure that the power was intelligently organized so that it was not easy for any group to subvert the constitution? And most importantly, does the constitution gives everyone some reason to go along with it? Most of the book is about this question. Also, third question is the constitution the locus of people's hope and aspiration? The ability of the constitution to command voluntary allegiance of the people depends on a certain extent upon whether the constitution is just. What the principle of justice underlying the Indian constitution? The last chapter of this book will answer this question. How was the Indian constitution made? Let us find out how the Indian constitution was made. Finally, the constitution was made by the Constituent Assembly, which had been elected for undivided India. It held its first sitting on 9th of December 1946 and reassembled as a Constitution Assembly for divided India on 14th of August 1947. Its main members were chosen by the indirect election by the members of the provincial legislative assemblies that had been established under the Government of India Act 1935. The Constituent Assembly was composed roughly along the lines suggested by the plan proposed by the Committee of the British Cabinet, known as a Cabinet Mission. According to this plan, each province and each princely state or the group of the state were allotted seats proportional to their respective population, roughly in the ratio of 1:10 lakh. As a result, the provinces that were under the direct British rule were to elect 292 members, while the princely state were allotted a minimum of 93 seats. The seats in each province were distributed among the three main communities, Muslim, Sikh and General, in a proportion to their respective populations. Members of each community in the provincial legislative assembly elected their own representative by the method of proportional representation with a single transferable vote. The method of selection in this case of the representative of princely state was to be determined by the constitution. We must make in box our political democracy a social democracy as well. Political democracy cannot last until there lies at the base of its a social democracy. What does the social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality and fraternity as the principle of life. These principles of liberty, equality and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. They form a union of trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. Liberty cannot be diverse from equality. Equality cannot be diverse from liberty. Nor can liberty and the equality be diverse from fraternity. Without equality, the liberty would produce the supreme of the few over many. Equality without the liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, the liberty and equality would not become a natural course of things. Box close. Are the principle of liberty, equality, fraternity being practiced in your classroom? How can they coexist? Discuss this with your friends. The previous section discussed the three factors that make a constitution effective and respectable. How far does the Indian constitution pass this test? Friends, we are from Leader IAS and Yashas Institute, Navi Mumbai, Maharashtra. Myself, Professor Suhas Sargar, presenting the self-explanatory video book for the self-study of a student, those who are preparing for the college exam or for the competitive exams. Without explanatory books are very useful for a student who are busy in their work or in their office life. So it is helpful for them to just listen or view this video during traveling as well as doing some other works. So it is very smart work. We are getting huge experience. Dear listeners, if you are interested in explanation of these NCERT book, we all can invite you. There is one number scrolling below the video screen. Just WhatsApp us your name and educations and your district. We will send a link for the live lectures that is completely free. The clarity is the power section for the current affairs, as well as the back to basic course is also free course. In this, we are teaching the State Board of Maharashtra and the CBSE books in a live interactive session, faculty, teachers, faculty and the student. If you are interested in joining the competitive exams like MPSC or UPSC, you are free to WhatsApp us, and it is a very reasonable course for a 1-year duration. That's all. Composition of the Indian Constitutional Assembly. As a consequence of the partition under the plan of 3rd June 1947, those members who were elected from territories which fell under the Pakistan ceased to be the members of Constituent Assembly. The number of members in the Assembly was reduced to 299. The Constitution was adopted on 26th of November 1949. 284 members were actually present on 24th January 1950 and appended their signature to the Constitution as finally passed. The Constitution came into force on 26th of January 1950. The Constitution was thus framed against the backdrop horrendous violence that the partition unleashed on the subcontinent. But it is a tribute to the fortitude or to the framers that they were not only able to draft a constitution under the immense pressure, but also learn the right lesson from the unimaginable violence that accompanied the partition. The Constitution was committed to a new conception of citizenship, where not only would minorities be secure, but the religious identity would have no bearing on citizenship rights. But this account of the composition of the Constituent Assembly that drafted the Constitution touches upon only the surface of how our Constitution was made. Although the members of the Assembly were not elected by the universal suffrage, there was a serious attempt to make the Assembly a representative body. Members of all religions were given the representation under the scheme described above. In addition, the Assembly had the 28 members from the scheduled caste. In terms of political parties, the Congress dominated the Assembly, occupying as many 82% of the seats in the Assembly after the partition. The Congress itself was such a diverse party that it managed to accommodate almost all shades of opinion within it. Next, principles of deliberations. The authority of the Constituent Assembly does not come only from the fact that it was broadly, though not perfectly, representative. It comes from the procedures it adopted to frame the Constitution and the values its members brought to the deliberation. While in any assembly that claims to be representative, it is desirable that the diverse sections of a society participate. It is equally important that they participate not only as a representative of their own identity or community. Each member deliberated upon the Constitution with the interest of the whole nation in mind. There were often the disagreements among members, but few of these disagreements could be traced to the members protecting their own interest. There were legitimate differences of the people, and the differences were many. Should India adopt the centralized or the decentralized system of the government? What should be the relation between the states and the center? What should be the powers of the judiciary? Should the constitution protect the property rights? Almost every issue that lies at the foundation of the modern state was discussed with a great sophistication. Only one provision of the constitution was passed without virtually any debate. The introduction of the universal suffrage, meaning that all citizens reaching a certain age would be entitled to be voters irrespective of the religion, caste, education, gender, or income. So, while the members felt no need at all to discuss the issue of who should have the rights to vote, every other matter was seriously discussed and debated. Nothing can be better testament to the democratic commitment of this assembly. The constitution drew its authority from the fact that the members of the constituent assembly engage in what one might call public reason. The members of the assembly place a great emphasis on the discussion and reasons arguments. They did not simply advance their own interest, but give principal reason to other members for their position. The very act of giving the reason to other makes you move away from simply a narrow consideration of your own interest, because you have to give reason to others to make them go along with your point of viewpoint. The voluminous debate in the Constituent Assembly, where each clause of the Constitution was subjected to a scrutiny and debate, is a tribute to public reason at its best. These debates deserve to be memorialized as one of the most significant chapters in the history of a constitution making, equal in importance to the French and American Revolution. Dear friends, you are seeing some pictures in this page. The President of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, and the Chairman of the Drafting Committee, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, greeting each other. I have realized, as nobody else could have, with what zeal and devotion the members of the Drafting Committee, and especially its Chairman, Dr. Ambedkar, in spite of his indifferent health, he had worked. We could never make a decision which was or could be ever so right as when we put him on the drafting committee and made him its chairman. He has not only justified his selection, but has added lustres to the work which has done. In this connection, it would be invidious to make any discrimination as among the other members of the committee. I know they have all worked with the same zeal and devotion as its chairman, and they deserve the thanks of the country. Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Box close. Procedures. The importance of the public reason was emphasized in the mundane procedure of the assembly as well. The Constituent Assembly had 8 major committees on different subjects. Usually Jawaharlal Nehru, Rajendra Prasad, Sardar Patel or B.R. Ambedkar chaired these committees. These were not men who agree with each other on many things. Ambedkar has been a bitter critic of the Congress and Gandhi, accusing them of not doing enough for the upliftment of the scheduled caste. Patel and Nehru disagree on many issues. Nevertheless, they all work together. Each committee usually drafted a particular provision of the constitution which were then subjected to debate by the entire assembly. Usually an attempt was made to reach a consensus with the belief that The provisions agreed, which by all would not be discriminatory to any particular interest. Some provisions were subjected to the vote, but in each instances, every single argument, query, or concern was responded with the great care and in writing. The Assembly met for 166 days, spread over the 2 years and 11 months. Its sessions were open to the press and the public alike. Inheritance of the nationalist movement. But no constitution is simply a product of the assembly that produces it. An assembly as diverse as the Constituent Assembly of India would not have functioned if there was no background consensus on the main principle of the constitution should enshrine. These principles were forged during the long struggle for freedom. In a way, the Constituent Assembly was giving a concrete shape and form to the principle. It had enshrined from the nationalist movement for decades preceding the promulgation of the Constitution. The nationalist movement had debated many questions that were relevant to the making of the Constitution. The shape and form of the government India should have, the values it should uphold, the inequalities it should overcome. Answers the forged in these debates were given their final form in the Constitution. Perhaps the best summary of the principle that the nationalist movement brought to the Constituent Assembly is the objective resolution. The resolution that defined the aims of the Assembly, moved by Nehru in 1946. These resolutions encapsulated the aspiration and the values behind the Constitution. What the previous sections terms as a substantive provision of the Constitution is inspired by and summed up by the values incorporated in the objective resolution. Based on these resolutions, our Constitution gave institutional expression to these fundamental commitments: equality, liberty, democracy, sovereignty, and cosmopolitan identity. Thus, our Constitution is not merely a maze of rules and procedures, but a moral commitment to establish a government that will fulfill the many promises that the nationalist movement held before the people. In diagram, what would have happened if we got independence in 1937, or if we had to wait till 1957? Should our Constitution be very different from what it is today? Question mark. The main points of the objective resolution. India is an independent, sovereign republic. India shall be union of erstwhile British Indian territories, Indian state, and other parts outside British India. An Indian state as are willing to be a part of the union. Territories forming the union shall be autonomous units and exercise all powers and functions of the government and administration, except those assigned to or vested in the union. All powers and authority of the sovereign and independent India and its constitution shall flow from the people. All people of India shall be guaranteed a secure social, economic, and political justice. Equality of the status and opportunities and equality before law and the fundamental freedom of speech, expression, belief, faith, worship, vocation, association, and action subject of the law and the public morality. The minorities backward and the tribal areas, depressed and other backward classes shall be protected provided adequate safeguard. The territorial integrity of the republic and its sovereign rights on the land, sea, and air shall be maintained according to justice and the law of civilized nations. The land would make full and the willing contribution to the promotions of the world peace and welfare of mankind. Institutional arrangement. The third factor ensuring the effectiveness of a constitution is a balanced arrangement of the institution of the government. The basic principle is that the government must be democratic and committed to the welfare of the people. The Constituent Assembly spent a lot of time on evolving the right balance among the various institutions like the executives, the legislatures and the judiciary. This led to the adaptation of the parliamentary form and the federal arrangement, which would distribute the government powers between the legislature and the executive on the one hand, and between the state and the central government on the other hand. While evolving the most balanced governmental arrangement, the makers of our constitution did not hesitate to learn from the experiments and the experiences of the other countries. Thus, the framers of the constitution were not averse to borrowing from other constitutional traditions. Indeed, it is a testament to their wide learning that they could lay their hands upon any intellectual arguments or the historical example that was necessary for fulfilling the task at hand. So, they borrowed a number of provisions from different countries. But borrowing these ideas was not slavish imitation. Far from it. Each provision of the Constitution had to be defended on the grounds that it was suited to Indian problems and aspirations. India was extremely lucky to have an assembly that, instead of being parochial in its outlook, would take the best available everywhere in the world and make it their own. In a diagram, was it a borrowed constitution then? Why could we not have a constitution that does not borrow anything from anywhere else? Question mark. One likes to ask whether there can be even anything new in a constitution frame, and these are in the history of the world. The only new thing, if there can be any, in a constitution frame so late in the day are the variations made to remove the faults and to accommodate it to the needs of the country. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Friends, see the pictures. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar presiding over a discussion in the Constituent Assembly. Now, the provisions adopted from the constitution of the different countries. See the pictures. The British Constitution, the first past the post, the parliamentary form of government, the idea of the rule of law, institution of the speaker and her or his role, the law-making procedures. From Irish Constitution, the directive principles of state policy. French Constitution, principle of liberty, equality and fraternity. United States Constitution, the charters of fundamental rights, the powers of judicial review and the independence of the judiciary. Canadian Constitution, a quasi-federal form of a government, a federal system with a strong central government. The idea of the residual powers, etc. Now the last part of this chapter is the conclusion. It is a tribute to the wisdom and the foresight of the makers of the Constitution that they presented to the nation a document that enshrined the fundamental values and the highest aspirations shared by the people. This is one of the reasons why this most intricately crafted document has not only survived but become a living reality. When so many other constitutions have perished with the paper they were first written on, India's constitution is a unique document which in turn became an exemplar for many other constitutions, most notably South Africa. The main purpose behind the long search that went on almost 3 years was to strike the right balance so that the institution created by the constitution would not be haphazard or the tentative arrangement, but would be able to accommodate the aspiration of the people of India for a long time to come. You will know more about these arrangements through the study of the remaining chapters in this book. Dear listeners, we are from Leader IAS and YES Institute, Navi Mumbai. Myself, Professor Suhas Sargar, presenting this video book to all of you. Dear listeners, these are the videos of the NCERT 11th Standard Political Science subject, the medium English, chapter Constitution Why and How. These are the video without explanation, are very useful for the self-study of a student, those who are preparing for a college exam as well as for the competitive exams like UPSC or the MPSC or any other state civil service exam. So if you are interested in having a UPSC or the MPSC courses online, you can simply WhatsApp us. Our number is scrolling below this video. If you are interested in current affairs or you are interested in the state board or the NCERT book course, then please simply WhatsApp us. Our lectures are going on live daily. So we were stopping over here and we